Welcome, everybody, to Mud Flood Was Armageddon, formerly known as Flat Earth Nation Golden Age Past, because it is a flat Earth nation. The Golden Age is past, and Mud Flood definitely was Armageddon. Don't let them tell you anything else unless they're willing to debate you in a fair and honest way. Conspiracies and perverts in power. Gonna wait for here a second while hopefully the audience builds up to a dozen or so people. Going to set up my monitor right now. Believe me, we're going to be getting into some, you know, we're going to start out going over some conspiracies that are proven, that no doubt existed, documented, cannot be denied because, well, they were caught. And the government, you know, can only lie for so long, and or, you know, they want it out there in the public record as they talk about the Illuminati has to make certain things known. I'm going to go ahead and put a link in the description that will, if Randy joins in and wants to come on the show, he can come on here. So, greetings to whoever else is watching with us here. Let's see. A little bit of a slow opening here. What's going on? Bear with me now. This is going to be good. So, Lord willing, we'll get the message out here today. Let's see what we got here. What is a criminal conspiracy in the first place? Suppose I should share the screen on that. Another good reason to have Randy here. Criminal conspiracy is an agreement between two or more persons. And we learned yesterday that a person can be a corporation, a legal person. Doesn't, there are only places and things because a person, place, or thing could be a corporation. An agreement between two or more persons to commit a crime at some time in the future. So let's see what we had left up here now. This is the Patrick Henry, famous for Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death, the founding father. Well, he was caught up in conspiracies way back at the founding of this country. We studied this the other day. He was a member of the Combined Society. We have that. I have these great. So anyway, it is secret societies that, basically are the ones guilty for leading your criminal conspiracies. And a lot of things in the most recent past lead back to Nazis and Prescott Bush's love for the Nazis. You can check that out at your earliest convenience. Unindicted co-conspirators is a word here. What's the conspiracy to defraud? But let's get into the first. These are known conspiracies that people cannot deny. Operation Menu. And I hope you have a pen in your hand so that you can go back over these and search them on YouTube and understand that these are proven. Operation Menu was a covert United States Strategic Air Command tactical bombing campaign conducted in Cambodia when the United States was involved in something called the Vietnam War. The Operation Menu lasted from the 18th of March through May 26, 1969 through May 26. Let me start that over. The 18th of March, 1969 to the 26th of May, 1970, it says as both as a part of the Vietnam War, which Cambodia was not in. The United States was not at war with Cambodia. Cambodia was in a civil war. The targets of these attacks were sanctuaries and base areas of the Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese Army, the Viet Cong, which used them to resupply, training, and resting between campaigns across the border into the Republic. And the official United States Air Force record of U.S. bombing activity over Indochina from 1964 to 1973 was only declassified by sexual pervert Lolita Express, Lolita Island, Jeffrey Epstein friend in the year 2000, after he was president. The report, or maybe it was at the end of his presidency, the report gives details of the extent of the bombing, which turned out to be the largest bombing campaign that ever existed. Ever existed. Want to say hello to Luther, you know him as Yaz Will Sorry, Mural, and Raleigh R. Well, peace to you guys. Peace. They're saying shalom, which is a peace. It means peace. So it was newly elected Richard Nixon who started carpet bombing Cambodia. And we'll look at Operation Freedom Deal because although it says it ended, it picked back up after that 1970 May, and it was an expansion of it. So this is a conspiracy, and our government covered it up. But later on, all we have to do is apologize. So maybe we'll come back to these, or maybe we just want to get them out. So how it went from Operation Menu to Operation Freedom Deal, another conspiracy. Operation Freedom Deal was a United States 7th Air Force interdiction. Well, let's see, an interdiction and close air support, but no interdiction is highlighted. So we better search that one on our own. Interdiction, well, it does have a term. I don't know why it wasn't highlighted. It must be part of a conspiracy to silence the conspiracy believers. Interdiction is a military term for the act of delaying, disrupting, or destroying the 3 Ds. You can understand the 3 R's of advertising by Edward Bernays, right? Reiteration, redundancy, and repetition. The 3 Ds of interdiction are delay, disrupting, and destroying enemy forces or supplies en route to the battlefield. A distinction is often made between strategic and tactical, delaying, disrupting, or destroying. Espionage is used for interdiction by the United States and China, at least, as 2 different people. Also, interdiction is used by the NSA when an electronic shipment is secretly intercepted by an intelligence agency, domestic or foreign, for the purpose of implanting bugs before they reach their destination. You know, they want to put in back doors so that they can access it later. China does it, you know, it says was reportedly interdicting that handheld shipping image scanners manufactured in China were found with pre-installed weaponized malware which was capable of exfiltrating, that means shipping it out, their data and financial data of what's been going on. So a very precious few. Uh, well, it leads to something called Operation Intercept, a new conspiracy, possibly. Operation Intercept was an anti drug measure engaged by President Nixon, and it surprisingly started, in September 21st. I saw September 11 there, but it was from the 21st of September to October 1969. So less than a month, that resulted in the near shutdown of border crossings. The initiative was intended to reduce the importance of Mexican marijuana. Do you smoke two joints in this morning? Do you smoke two joints at night? Do you smoke two joints before you smoke two joints? That's just a song I heard somewhere along the line, but they were trying to cut that out with Operation Intercept. Didn't last too long. Watergate was one of the conspiracies we could have covered, but there are so many. And eventually I'm going to, want to take time to, what's your favorite conspiracy? You can put that in the chat and maybe we'll look into it. But Operation Intercept has been a rabbit trail. But anyway, they had to stop it, I guess, because of complaints from cross-border travelers and from Diaz Ordaz, the non-blue highlighted. The searching of vehicles reduced after 10 days and completely abandoned after about 20. The Nixon administration believed that it had largely achieved its goal. They stopped doing it. Who is Diaz Ordaz? Diaz Ordaz is and was a Mexican political member of the IRP, the PRI in Espanol. He served as the president of Mexico during that time. And he was telling President Nixon, man, what are you doing intercepting all the cars with your Operation Intercept, stopping the flow of money? So a president that we didn't know about. So back to Operation Freedom Deal, where they kicked up the carpet bombing. This was denied for a long time. President Nixon famously said, you have a right to know if your president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. Well, he lied about a lot of things, and one of them was that he was bombing a country we were not at war with. Operation Freedom Deal was a United States 7th Air Force interdiction and close air support campaign waged in Cambodia. An expansion of the Vietnam War. As an expansion of the Vietnam War, they bombed a country that we didn't even pretend we had a right to be bombing. I know. Dominoes would have fallen if the commies got into it. The initial targets of the operation were the base areas of the border sanctuary. So it was just going up, expanding it. But they had to, as time went on, most of the bombing was carried out to support the Cambodian government of Lon Nol in its struggle against the murderous Khmer Rouge and the infamous Pol Pot. A genocide that took place in my lifetime, one of the many. So proven. And there was also an Operation Patio. Khmer Rouge. The U.S. responded first by launching Operation Patio, which consists of tactical strikes into Cambodia. Once again, this was a conspiracy that was denied and then later had to be admitted. Post-war escalation. So this was, in 1970, that was just about before the United States was have to pull their first Afghanistan. They had been in Afghanistan 20 years. The patience was running out, so they just left. 1970 was just about when they were going to do the same thing to the people that had supported them in Vietnam and then just leave them to the communists. So Operation Freedom Deal, they were expanding it, bombing, causing more heartache, terror. The withdrawal of the United States forces in May left only South Vietnamese and Cambodian forces to do battle with the PAVN, the Viet Cong, and the Khmer Rouge. U.S. tactical aircraft began supplying FANK troops with direct air support. And you might, what was that air? It was the CIA supported. President Nixon announced that the policy of the United States Air Force was only to interdict supply networks from the Viet Cong, and that they were only to be conducted within a specified zone. Well, that was nice. But post-invasion escalation. These conspiracies always lead to it. And they say they just started spying on phones, but transcripts of phone conversation reveal that by December 1970, Nixon's declassification with the success of the bombings prompted him to order that they be stopped. Quote, "They have got to go in there, and I mean really go in," President Nixon told Henry Kissinger. "I want them to hit everything. I want them to use big planes, small planes, everything they can that will help kill them and get them out there. And let's start giving them a little shock and awe." So Kissinger relayed Nixon's orders, and a massive bombing campaign in Cambodia by the side of the United States that was losing the war and getting ready to pull out made one last desperate attempt to say, "Here we are. We've got these bombs and they're, we got to use them or lose them. They're paid for, and, we've got to make more." So you can study Operation Freedom Deal. Let's see, and these are bomb craters. Probably, brought to you by the government, who wants you to wear a mask because of their science, but it also is the same people who use science to deny that Agent Orange was killing people for many, many years before that proved to be a lie. So another, one you might have heard about, a conspiracy that people say is nothing, but they've had to admit that, well, there really is a Bohemian Grove. It's more than a ranch, it's a lifestyle. The Bohemian Grove is a restricted 2,700-acre campground. And they even give you the address if you want to go there, belonging to a private San Francisco-based gentleman's club. The Gentlemen's Club is a private social club. Usually it's a strip club nowadays. And I think there was a lot of, who knows if it was gay or bisexual, but these is, they're perverts in power. And the Gentlemen's Club is known as the Bohemian Club. So the Bohemian Club, we'll pull that up to look at it next, host a more than 2-week encampment. The rich and famous or wannabe rich and famous get invited there for an over 2-week encampment of some of the most prominent men in the world and their families. Bohemian Club's all-male membership include artists and musicians, as well as many prominent leaders, government officials, former U.S. presidents, media executives, and people of power. Members may invite guests to the Grove. Guests may be invited to the Grove for either the Spring Jinx in June or the main July encampment. Club members can schedule private day-to-day events at the Grove anytime it is not being used for club-wide purposes. And well, we'll just read a little more. After 40 years of membership, the men earn Old Guard status, giving them reserved seating at the Grove's daily talks as well as other prerequisites. My bad. Former United States President Herbert Hoover was inducted into the Old Guard on March 4, 1953. So that must have meant that he joined in 1913, about the time, the Federal Reserve was planning to enslave our money. And they got it down to the date. They knew the date he had joined, and exactly 40 years later, they said, President Hoover, welcome to the Old Guard. The club motto is weaving spiders come not here, because spiders weave webs of deception, and well, I guess they didn't want anybody talking about it, which implies that outside concerns and business deals are to be left outside. This was probably strictly. The Bohemian Grove is particularly famous for a Manhattan Project planning meeting, which means that they're the ones that planned. We need some fake math to do some fake bombs because we're going to fake scare everybody to death and make them believe that the United States won the war by inventing something that is mathematically impossible. Can't do it. The tradition of summer encampment was established 6 years after the Bohemian Club was formed in 1872. It was founded by Henry Edwards, a stage actor. He was a founding member and announced that he was relocating to New York to further his career. On June 29, 1878, somewhat fewer than 100 Bohemians gathered in the redwoods of Marion County near Taylorville for an evening send-off party in Edwards' honor. Freely flowing liquor, because, sugar is sweet, but liquor is quicker when it comes to slip of the tongues. And some Japanese lanterns were put out. I don't know, though maybe they weren't getting the big, let's worship the owl. But as promised, we're just going to be doing a hit and miss, Here's a famous picture of the Bohemians. Jack London, George Sterling, Peter Garrett, a typical tent that has pictures of, that looks like it's trying to represent a Jewish person with the stars and the moons, and looks kind of bad. Here is some sort of the white silence. Jack London. You can't make it through high school without saying this guy here is one of the greatest writers in the world, and that's your typical Bohemian tent with Japanese lanterns. Porter Garrett, George Sterling, and Jack London. There's a little cabin in the aerial image of the Bohemian Groves. Not much of a fence, a side entrance. Oh, what's this? A dress rehearsal for the Grove play in 1909. Is this an altar here? Can't really tell, but that's Why couldn't they get a bigger picture? Dress rehearsal for the Grove play. The Bohemian Grove is a conspiracy. Oh, there's the owl shrine covered in moss, standing among the trees. There's your moss covered owl shrine that supposedly Alex Jones snuck onto it and got the first pictures, but he more and more is seen by a lot of people as being kind of maybe in on it, selective exposure. Oh, yep, Alex Jones in the year 2000 clandestinely entered the Bohemian Grove and shot footage of the cremation of care, an annual ritual production produced by the Bohemian Grove. Here is the firing up of the moss covered owl. This is that stage we just looked at. Just looked at it. There it is. Cremation of Care, dramatic performance, is presented on the first night of the encampment as an allegorical banishing of worldly cares. They just don't care what's right or wrong. And to present symbolically the salvation of the trees. Come on, man. Who are you trying to kid? Who are they trying to kid? Welcome, Tom. How are you doing? Thank you so much for being here. So we got the history earlier when we studied it. And here's an interesting, it looks like, sentence. The cremation of care, the ceremony, further expanded in 1893. That'd be about 5 years after my brother Randy's favorite year in history, 1888. By a member, it was expanded by the member Joe Redding with a midsummer hijinks entitled The Sacrifice of the Forest, or simply Druid Jinks, in which brotherly love and Christianity battled and won against paganism, converting the Druids away from bloody sacrifice. Wow. Wow. This cremation of care brought about, immediately followed, and lasted till midnight. The end of the ceremony was signaled by a lively Jinx band rendition of There'll Be a Hot Time in the Old Town Tonight, at their all-male club. Cremation of Care, Bohemian Grove, once considered a conspiracy, proven true. The perverts of power love to be there. The Bohemian Club, private location, we looked at that. Here's their owl. You might want to think of the Minerva photograph with the medal. So that's the Bohemian Club City Clubhouse. The club's mascot is an owl. There's a memorial to Joe Mora. Probably going to be small. Yep. Don't want to get too much detail there. So the Bohemian Club. Also another one that they denied was COINTELPRO. Welcome, Marcelo. Did you know that we're going over conspiracies that were denied once but have been proven true by the perverts in power on this Conspiracy Sunday? What is COINTELPRO? Well, it's a syllabic abbreviation derived from counterintelligence, an activity aimed at protecting an agency's intelligence program. COINTELPRO projects actively conducted by the United States FBI aimed at surveilling, infiltrating, and discrediting and disrupting domestic American political organizations. This is back in the days when the CIA wasn't supposed. They didn't have permission back then to work in the United States. It didn't stop them. They said, watch out. They did it against feminists, the Communist Party, anti-Vietnam War organizers, Black Panthers, Nation of Islam, Puerto Rican independence seekers, the Ku Klux Klan. They make it seem so good, but they are doing it against people like me and like you. In 1972, in San Diego, the FBI financed, armed, and controlled an extreme right wing group of former members of the Minutemen. Well, that's a title that doesn't go out of style, does it? Minutemen were anti-communist paramilitary organization, like the ones who fake plotted a coup against the United States, and now they want to call that maybe the insurrection. That a couple of police officers died of a heart attack because I think they were very unhealthy, old, and about 300 pounds, and couldn't handle the stress that day. But they were a secret army organization. We'll get into that. The FBI has used covert operations. Again, this conspiracy that they denied and can deny it anymore, so had to admit it. Covert operations against domestic political groups since its inception. However, covert operations under the official COINTELPRO label took place between 1956 and 1971, and then they just stopped. But they wanted to do psychological warfare. A lot of people don't believe it, but the Nazis in the United States merged, as we'll get to later, and they were sharing information about psychological warfare used in COINTELPRO, starting with blackmail through smearing individuals. Groups used forged documents. Why not? Fake somebody out. Planting false reports in the media. Operation Mockingbird. Harassment. Wrongful imprisonment. Illegal violence. Think of your G7, in Seattle when masked people all of a sudden started breaking windows, and it turned out later they were part of Delta Force. So the FBI's motivation was protecting national security, using violence to hopefully prevent violence. And they wanted to maintain the existing New World Order. I mean, the existing social and political order. That's their justification for COINTELPRO. It goes into, this is quite a long. So this is one you're going to have to study by yourself. But COINTELPRO once was a conspiracy of people who were crazy, but proven true that it existed. And basically, it's just a shrug of the shoulder to the people who like QAnon, Donald Trump, when they go, well, it's for the better good of the United States. And so, you have to break a few eggs if you want to make an omelet, the communists say. And with that, the supporters of COINTELPRO would fully agree. Who they target, as long as they target your enemies, it's okay. It's okay. I see even Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali in the fight of the century. Was that fixed? The program was secret until March 8, 1971, when the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI burgled. They had to break the law before they admitted it in Pennsylvania, in Media, Pennsylvania, interesting name, took several dossiers and exposed the program by passing this material on to news agency. The boxing match known as the fight of the century between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier provided cover for the activist group to fully and pull off the burglary. Muhammad Ali was a COINTELPRO because he was against the war. So a lot of famous people surveilled, a lot of justification, examples of surveillance. President Roosevelt asked the FBI to spy on the Nazi-loving Charles Lindbergh. President Truman received information on a former Roosevelt aide efforts to influence his appointments. President Eisenhower, he was a crook. He was one of the on the board of the United Fruit Company, and the United Fruit Company was where the term banana republics, as they Operation PB Success. I'm pretty sure that's it. Operation PB Success, another conspiracy to overthrow a government headed by the much beloved President Eisenhower, who the untrained mind will say he tried to warn us about the political and the war machine. No, he did not. He was mocking it. He didn't want to, watch out, in his speech warned Kennedy. Kennedy and Roosevelt are not to be looked at as people who were trying to help. President Johnson, President Nixon, they all did it. Groups that were known to be targeted by COINTELPRO: communist, socialist, black nationalist, the Young Lords, Chicago-based street gang, white supremacist groups, National States Rights Party, and many more. The list could go on, but put that down in your book. And if you wanted to know, you could end up dead, like Fred Hampton, national spokesman for the Black Panther Party, because COINTELPRO, could get you professionally wet worked. Wet worked is a hit. Well, we got to keep moving on. Sunday, Conspiracy Sunday, Operation Berkshire. Corporations do conspiracy too. Operation Berkshire was the 7 major tobacco companies that started adding chemicals that would take the very peaceful and non-cancer causing organic tobacco and start adding ingredients to them, basically through ammonia, formaldehyde, phosgene, and other things to make them more addicting. And through the burning of those chemicals, they can cause cancer. So Operation Berkshire, although they leave out that organic tobacco has never been proven to cause cancer, they wanted smoking cigarettes. They wanted people to die slower the better. What's Project Scum? Tobacco Plan, Alternative Lifestyle. Project Scum was a plan proposed in 1995 to sell cigarettes to members of the gay community of San Francisco. In particular, the large number of gay people in the Castro and homeless people in the Tenderloin area. Wow. And the hits keep coming. We're still looking at, proven conspiracies before I go to you for your advice. How about you start a war by making up that you were attacked in the Gulf of Tonkin incident? Denied for years, proven true that the United States lied. The Gulf of Tonkin incident was an made up international confrontation. I added made up, but you'll see later it was true. That led to the United States engaging more directly in the Vietnam War. It involved both a proven confrontation carried out by the North Vietnamese forces and a second claimed confrontation 2 days later between ships of North Vietnam and the United States in the waters of the Gulf of Tonkin. Originally, American claims blamed North Vietnam for both attacks. A destroyer called the USS Maddox got torpedoed, and then the USS Turner Joy joined Maddox on another Desto mission. That evening, the ships opened fire on radar and sonar returns that had been preceded by communication intercepts. We studied intercepts earlier in Operation Intercept and what it is. The commander of the Maddox Task Force, Captain John Herrick, reported that the ships were being attacked. Oh my goodness. And somehow this ties into the singer of the Doors. His father was an admiral, and you know that when that admiral retired, Admiral Morrison, was the same day that his son drowned in a pool. And a lot of people started a rumor by me was that was the communists telling him, "Thank you very little for helping start a war." Gulf of Tonkin started a war, upped the level of violence in the war. And basically, our big destroyer was attacked by this little thing. This is a torpedo boat. So that was the upstart of the war. This little boat attacked a naval destroyer, and much money was spent. This looks to me like a stereotropic 3D thing where if you stare at it long enough, a demon will pop out of it. That was the level of your electronic surveillance equipment in the 70s, how far we've come. The snake in the grass, Lyndon Johnson, alleged murderer of his own sister. She was an embarrassment to him. Helped with the mafia, and according to some people, killed the president of the United States, John F. Kennedy. But I think that was all a big setup. Gulf of Tonkin, once a conspiracy, but now proven true. Jim Morrison. Thank you, Thomas Morgan, for helping me out on that. Singer of the Doors. Now, MK Ultra, denied, but then proven true. But it was an illegal human experimentation program. I wonder if I copy that. Open up a YouTube program here. You guys heard of that YouTube? Of course you have. You're watching it probably on a YouTube right now, along with a dozen other people. Wonder if there are any Creative Commons. Nothing's jumping right out at me here. How healers became killers. Wow. So that's a good way to do it if you ever just want to, that means that you can, if it's Creative Commons, just like this video is here, you all can record this and share it, with no copyright strikes, no problems. A lot of this seems to be about animal testing. Berkeley acting like they're not part of the problem. Let's do a little bit of typing here as we are just freewheeling it. Because this is kind of like, I wonder if that's a Creative Commons thing.
Phobias are a fascinating part of the psyche. Some are completely understandable and possibly even evolutionary, as being scared of dangerous things and creatures is pretty beneficial for survival. But a question has eluded psychologists. How are phobias present in some people but not others? And can you condition a fear in a human test subject?
Can you condition a fear? Have we been conditioned for fear?
This question would lead psychologist John B. Watson and his assistant graduate student Rosaline Rayner down a very ethically questionable path. Not only was experimenting on a human controversial, but the test subject would be a 9-month-old baby. Today we're looking at the controversial, heartbreaking, and morally questionable Baby Albert experiments. Welcome to the dark side of science. Is even more controversial than deliberately scare an infant is very off-putting. The experiment is even more controversial than the monkey mother studies, as the long-term effects could be scarring for an otherwise healthy human child. As such, I'm going to rate the experiment here 8 on my ethical scale, as the subject had no say in becoming part of the study, and the alleged sourcing of the child was not, shall we say, in the most praiseworthy way. But before we get to baby Albert, we need a little background to the person behind the experiment, John B. Watson. John Broadus Watson was born in Travelers Rest, South Carolina on the 9th of January 1878. He was brought up in a strict Christian family, but things would change.
Come on, man. Don't they, do they, who would believe that? Be a wide road Christian family, more like it.
In a teenager's home life when his alcoholic father left the family. This would cause
So, was it a strict Christian family or an alcoholic father?
John to become apathetic towards religion. The family later moved to Greenville, South Carolina, where Watson would get a chance to meet people of different backgrounds, igniting his interest into psychology. His secondary education was marred with run-ins with the law for fighting and bizarrely discharging a firearm within city limits. However, he was still able to gain a place at Greenville's Furman University at the age of 16. His time at university was difficult, having to work several jobs. He didn't excel and did not create many social bonds, which left people to think of him as lazy and antisocial. But he persisted and at the age of 21 gained a master's degree. He managed to get into Chicago University a couple of years later and
A very, very Roman Catholic Loyola University.
finally his career started to take a more positive turn.
Loyola Jesuit.
Studying under some notable professors, including John Dewey and James Rowland Angel, Watson began to develop an interest in behavioralism.
When you hear behavioralism, B.F. Skinner, Pavlov's dog, it all is about human conditioning. Welcome Trinity 88 and Murat Ilkem. Aleister Crowley had a quote unquote Christian background. They simply want to mock us, is what Murat added. Thank you for that.
During his time at Chicago, he read up on the work of Ivan Pavlov, known for his classic conditioning, a discipline which would directly influence Watson's later experiments. As a side note, this is the same Pavlov with the dribbling dog. I should say that during this time, Watson had got married and was the father of 2 children, but his marriage would break down, but this will come a bit later on in our story. In 1902, Watson gained his PhD whilst working as a research professor at the University of Chicago. In 1908, Watson accepted a faculty position at Johns Hopkins University, being promoted to chair of the psychology department not long after starting. He continued to study behavioralism, releasing a paper in 1913 named Psychology.
How about a little segue here while I, say hi? Little known background about Alan Paco in high school. For a brief cup of coffee, after 3 attempts, I was accepted into the band Bitch, so named because even in the late 70s, we were a cover band of the Rolling Stones. The name of the band, Bitch, was taken from the song Bitch by the Rolling Stones that famously goes, uh, yeah, when you call my name, I salivate like a Pavlov dog. Yeah, when you lay me out, my heart is beating louder than a big brass drum. Oh, yeah. So I guess that's just showing off that, I had the enthusiasm, I didn't have the talent.
As the behaviouralist views it, a manifesto of sorts laying out the goals of the new discipline. Behavioralism, as Watson saw it, sought to understand behaviour by only measuring observable behaviours and events, and that these actions were influenced from external stimuli. As a consequence of that individual's history and learned behaviour from reinforcement or punishment. This new form of psychological study wasn't initially accepted by the wider scientific community, but gradually the new discipline would make inroads to be a recognized field. The discipline would be expanded upon by
All right, well let's get ahead to the experiment of baby Albert.
turbulent years for Watson, which brought about the Baby Albert experiment. In 1919, Watson released a paper called A Schematic Outline of the Emotions. During this study, he observed a number of infants which revealed three fundamental emotions: fear, rage, and love, each caused by a set of conditions. Watson used various animals to observe the reaction from the test subjects. In most cases, especially when introduced to dogs and cats, the infants showed a neutral or an inquisitive reaction. But when introduced to a pigeon flapping its wings, most subjects showed surprise or even fear of the motion and sound. To induce fear, some of the test subjects were placed in a dark room or in a room on their own. Needless to say, the children became distressed. Now, these tests are pretty mild and generally yielded predictable results. But what if you can get an infant to fear something that had initially yielded a neutral response? For example, one of the cuddly animals from his 1919 study. This would be done by introducing a neutral stimulus, like a rabbit, with a scary stimulus, for example, from a loud banging sound. They tried to answer the following questions: that if a fear stimulus could be transferred to other animals or other inanimate objects. Once a fear had been conditioned in the test subject, they also went to find out for how long. Right, this is where the study, in my opinion, crosses the line, as the sourcing of the test subject and finding a parent willing to allow their child to be given a phobia would be understandably difficult. Baby Albert was a child of a wet nurse at the Harriet Lane Home, a paediatric facility on the Johns Hopkins campus. Now, it's not 100% known how Albert was found. Clearly, a major contributory factor was the convenience, as Harriet Lane was adjacent to the Phipps Clinic, where Watson's infant laboratory was housed. There are three possible ways Watson got hold of Albert that have been considered. The first is through a paid study. The second is by using his connections at the hospital to coerce and allow access to the infant. And the final is from doing the experiment without the mother's knowledge. But we will never know 100% how Albert was found by Watson, and we don't even know if that is his real name. What we do know is that he was selected due to being a healthy, unemotional child who rarely cried. The experiment wasn't just conducted by Watson alone, but also one of his graduate students, Rosaline Rayner. I should say that his relationship with her had caused issues with his breaking down marriage by late 1919. At the start of 1920, and at 8 months and 26 days of age, baby Albert was entered into the study. Albert was observed reacting to a number of live animals, for example, a rat, a dog, a rabbit, and a monkey, and various inanimate objects, including human masks, cotton, and a burning newspaper. During the initial phase, Albert showed no elevated signs of distress or major reaction to the stimuli. What Watson and Rosaline did see was elevated distress when a metal bar was hit with a hammer, which created a large amount of noise, sending little Albert into a burst of tears. 2 months would go by after Albert's baseline observations before the experimental conditioning would begin. Watson and Rayner attempted to condition him to fear one of the items that had previously garnered a neutral response. A white rat was chosen to be an item to condition Albert's fear response. This was done by presenting the animal to the infant, and every time he touched it, the metal pole was hit with the hammer, creating the scary noise. It wouldn't take long for Albert to start to fear the cuddly animal, after 7 pairings of the rat and the noise in 2 sessions, 1 week apart. Albert reacted with crying when the rat was presented subsequently with no loud noise, although he didn't seem as distressed when he was allowed to suck his thumb, which hints at a phobia not actually being created. A couple of weeks after the conditioning, Albert started to fear other similar items that shared similar characteristics with the rat. The generalized fear manifested whenever the family dog, a fur coat, some cotton wool, and even a Father Christmas mask was presented to the infant.
Father Christmas mask. Oh my goodness.
A couple of weeks after that, Albert's fear of the rat had died down, including the response to the other similar items. This prompted Watson to recondition the infant by presenting the rat again with the loud noise. Each reconditioning would only take a few rounds of the scary noises, but what of the questions set out by the pair before the experiment? How long does the condition last? 31 days after no exposure to the test items, Albert was shown a rat, a coat, and Santa mask. He again showed a fear response. Not long after the final experiment, Albert's mother withdrew her child from the study and left the hospital for good, leaving little trace of what happened to the test subject. This had 2 downsides. The first was that Albert was unable to be reconditioned to not fear the rat and the linked fear producing things, and the other issue was that the study was incomplete. The study did not have a control subject involving only one infant, which makes the data.
So basically, the baby Albert study, and just so that you know, we've been going over, in case you're late joining, as many of you are, Operation Menu, followed by Operation, follow up, Operation Freedom Deal, bombing, different conspiracies that were first denied and then went on to accept, and like the COINTELPRO. COINTELPRO denied, exposed, still going on today, led to, your Operation Mockingbird, where the media can now do it. Operation Berkshire, covering up how tobacco was made evil by people who added ammonia and 217 at least other ingredients that do cause cancer to the harmless organic tobacco, which has never been proven to cause cancer. We looked at the Gulf of Tonkin, another made up, conspiracy. I think not. And now we're looking at MK Ultra. We only made it into human experimentation so far, but it was basically that doctor was the Central Intelligence going back to 1919 for brainwashing and psychological torture. Psychological torture, you can still see that the dog thing was very successful. Using psychoactive drugs wrong, chemicals, electric shock therapy, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, anybody going for social isolation, verbal and sexual abuse. Well, that's other forms of torture, but the sexual perverts in power, thinking, of the denied for now Lolita Express, Lolita Island, Bill Clinton. MK Ultra was preceded by Project Bluebird and Project Artichoke. If you don't have a notebook and pen out, I would suggest you go back over this complete video with a pen and paper, and your studies will go on. Now, the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence coordinated with the United States Army Biological Warfare Laboratories, because Somehow it all came up to uh, where they can introduce DNA through a hokey pokey, not the song. I'm talking about the jab. So MK Ultra was first brought to the public by the church committee, and not much happened during that. But Freedom of Information Acts were a little bit different back then. Nowadays they're retuned. It basically they're all redacted. This is not a good redaction. Today the whole thing would be blacked out unashamedly. Sidney Gottfried, a big studier, doctor. So MK Ultra, once denied, called a conspiracy, just like Operation Prism. They've had computers of all different types. Alan Dulles, another director of the CIA, was on the board of United Fruit. United Fruit founded the Banana Republics by Operation PB Success, backed by the CIA, using different information. It's all true. They wanted to produce the perfect truth drug. One of the conspiracies that didn't make it into the final cut was that there was a drug that was going to be dropped to a gay bomb to turn people into gays so that they would put down their weapons and only be interested in having sex with their fellow soldiers. That was really studied in 1955. MK Ultra documents gives indication of the size and range of the efforts. It refers to the study of an assortment of mind altering, mind bending substances which will promote illogical thinking and impulsiveness. You guys ever been guilty of that? You don't know why? Substances which increase the efficiency of mentation and perception. Substances which will prevent or counteract the intoxicating effects of alcohol. That way, it could seem like you're getting drunk with somebody, but they're not really drunk. Materials that will make you more drunk. Materials that produce the signs and symptoms of recognizable disease to get you worried and thinking they can give you a cure. Materials that will render the induction of hypnotism easier. Ever been pulling for a team like there's no tomorrow and you never liked that team before? Substances which will enhance the ability to withstand privation, torture, coercion during intelligence, and so-called brainwashing. Products that will produce amnesia. Physical methods for producing shock and confusion over extended periods. Substances that produce physical disablement, such as paralysis. You just can't move while they torture you so that you can be terrified for it. Substances that will produce, in quotes, pure euphoria. I'm thinking that they had to settle for adrenochrome. Substances which alter your personality. Anybody ever felt like that was being done? Material, the MK Ultra wanted to produce material that will cause mental confusion. Substances which will lower the ambition and make people into their 30s, 40s, and now 50s and still live in mommy's basement. Substances which promote weakness, distortion of the eyes, a knockout pill. Well, we've all heard of that. Material that can surreptitiously be administered by the above routes and which in very small amounts will make it impossible for a person to perform physical activity. So MK Ultra, once denied, but it is real. Operation Midnight Climax, where they got the perverts in power and they could be brainwashed for life. Think of young Rhodes Scholars, Hillary Rodham and Bill Clinton, left alone in Russia. What happened to there? What did they do and why? Whose side are they on? Knowing that it isn't really governments that run the world, it's the mafias of them. The projects studied the effects of psychoactive drugs, particularly LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, cocaine, AMT, and DMT on people with and without their knowledge. Oh my goodness. So it's all true. It's all scary. It's all been denied, but we have to move on because there are so many. What was the business plot? Who is General Smedley Butler? And they had a plan to install him as dictator. That means the head of the corporation of the United States. You all know that we're a corporation. It all came down to because of what happened, in the shacks when the veterans wanted their bonuses and the United States didn't want to pay. So Eisenhower and Patton were sent in to burn them down and kill some people. So Smedley Butler was brought in. The business plot was, it says, an alleged political conspiracy in 1933 to overthrow the government of President Franklin Roosevelt and install Smedley Butler, famous for his quote that all wars are bankers' wars. They were looking for a coup d'etat, kill the leader, replace him with a new one, and say, life goes on, nothing we can do. You got to go to work today. We're going to have, week of mourning, but life goes on. This was in 1932. Thousands of World War I veterans converged on Washington, D.C. to set up tent camps and demand immediate payment of bonuses due them that they had been waiting on since 1924. Because there was, remember the crash of 1929, their bonuses were essentially becoming worthless fast. And they didn't feel like they should have to wait till it was down to nothing, which could very well be the reason that it happened. So you might want to study Smedley Butler and realize how many conspiracies they lied about.
I appeared before the Congressional Committee, the highest representation of the American people, under subpoena to tell what I knew of activities which I believe might lead to an attempt to set up a fascist dictatorship. The plan as outlined to me was to form an organization of veterans, to use as a bluff or as a club at least, to intimidate the government and break down our democratic institutions. The upshot of the whole thing was that I was supposed to lead an organization of 500,000 men, which would be able to take over the functions of government. I talked with an investigator for this committee who came to me with a subpoena on Sunday, November 18th. He told me they had unearthed evidence linking my name with several such veteran organizations. As it then seemed to me to be getting serious, I felt it was my duty to tell all I knew of such activities to this committee. My main interest in all this is to preserve our democratic institutions. I want to retain the right to vote, the right to speak freely, and the right to write. If we maintain these basic principles, our democracy is safe. No dictatorship can exist with suffrage, freedom of speech, and press.
So it would seem that General Smedley Butler was a setup, that they used him to think that, yeah, we're going to be able to overthrow the government, you'll be in charge. But in the end, he said, no, America's too great. We can rebuild it and fix these problems, not knowing that this is not a restoration. This is going to be a rescue by the Lord Jesus Christ, because there's no fixing this demon devil worshiping government that we're in. So that is the business plot. But what about the Tuskegee syphilis study? Another one planned by our United States and denied for many, many years, of where they gave syphilis to human beings and promised them free health care, but then they never treated it. The Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male, now just known as the Tuskegee experiment, was a study conducted from 1932 to 1972 by the United States and the Centers for Disease Control. You know them, the CDC, the ones who told you that wear a mask and stand 6 feet away because that is the best practice for social distancing. Nearly 400 African Americans with syphilis were lied to and told that they were going to be treated for it. But the purpose of the study was to observe the effects of the disease when untreated. Human experiments leading to many deaths, many cross infections of their wives, and it just was worse. So things got worse. There were no ethical standards required because back in the 1930s they weren't considered human. I think that's how it started out, and so that's just another one that was once denied but later proven to be true. So this is just a sampling of the many, many once called conspiracies but turned out to be true. And it's an encouragement that I want you to know many of what they call conspiracies now are true and you know it. But they'll deny it and deny it until they have to go, we didn't know. Only three more, and I'll be taking your questions. And Operation Condor, another one that was denied, proven true later. Operation Condor was a United States backed campaign of political repression and state terror involving the CIA and other intelligence operations and assassination of opponents. It was officially and formally implemented in November 1975 by the right-wing dictatorships of the southern cone of South America. Due to its clandestine nature, the precise number of deaths directly attributed to Operation Condor is highly disputed. But in the predominantly mandatorily you must be Roman Catholic Argentina, some estimates are that at least 60,000 deaths and roughly 30,000 of these in Argentina. The Archives of Terror lists 50,000 killed, another 30,000 disappeared, and closing in on a 500,000, 400,000 imprisoned. They had gone into exile, and it says in open quote, kidnapped, tortured, and killed in allied countries or illegally transferred to their home countries to be executed. Hundreds or thousands of such persons, the number has still not been fully determined, were abducted, tortured, and murdered in Operation Condor, although described, the next paragraph begins and then it continues, by the CIA as a, open quote, cooperative effort by the intelligence / security services of several South American countries to combat terror and subversion, close quote. But, you know, we had to do it doing the combating of the guerrillas. So what's Operation Paperclip? Out of order here. So could Operation, with General Smedley Butler overthrow a government, install a new government? Has it ever been tried before? The once denied can't be denied anymore because Tom Cruise made a movie about it. Operation Valkyrie and the plot to kill Hitler. There could have been a JFK assassination, a rumors of a plot, but no, there was no plot. Operation Valkyrie was a World War II emergency continuity of government operation plan issued by the Territorial Reserve Army of Germany. And Prescott Bush's fingers were all over it, although I have to admit there's no signed paper where Prescott Bush says I was involved in it. But, you know, he's always around the smoke and the fire. So basically, that is just to say governments have been attempted to be overthrown. Some have been overthrown. But if you overthrow a government illegally or for nefarious reasons, you're not going to rewrite history and say, yeah, we're the bad guys and just wanted to take over. Think of the Hunger Games. How about that? And finally, Operation Paperclip. I've talked about it many times, you know, a secret United States intelligence program in which, you know, think double the size of this. German scientists, engineers, and technicians were taken from Nazi Germany, and in many cases, their Nazi past and atrocities covered up, to the United States for employment in the United States at the end of World War II. And it wasn't only the United States. All of the Allied countries took in former Nazis. And the most famous of the Nazis being some of the, you know, people in this picture who worked on, you know, Kurt H. Debus, former V-2 rocket. The most famous being Werner von Braun. He was an Operation Paperclip, man who used slaves to do it, studied psychological warfare to work them to death and see how much they could do. The B-2 rocket. Here's a group of 104 rocket scientists with, this is Werner von Braun right here. So by 1958, when they founded NASA, the same Bill started DARPA. So there, you know, let's see, only an hour and 17 minutes, and we covered many what they called conspiracies. And I'm putting it out there because I want you to know you're not a wacko. You're not crazy. They'll lie to your face. They'll lie on the news to people that have been psychologically manipulated to turn your family against you. But the Lord Jesus also did not come to bring peace, but division, because he knew this was a judgment, not a restoration. And if Jesus Christ came to bring division, what should you do? If it involves your family and so-called friends, embrace the division, because your salvation is the most important thing to your eternity. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up, unless I'll give you a couple of minutes if you have any questions. Let's see, there's some here. Chad the Gambler had some the other day, and that I read afterwards that were questions I missed. You have 2 billion Gentiles arguing over the law, and it was never to the Gentiles, like it says. And even the Gentiles back then, Paul and Peter said how we can expect them to do it when they can't do it either. Truer words have never been spoken. During that wicked and despised generation before Jesus came back, there were laws for the Jews that the Gentiles did not have to do it. As a matter of fact, in Acts 15, let's go there, because there's a conspiracy of silence surrounding that in Acts 15, which I think is our best hope. This took place, you know, based on the gospel to Galatians. They went to, and they had a Jerusalem council because the Jews were saying, you've got to be circumcised according to the custom of Moses. You can't be saved unless you are. And it wasn't just circumcised. The Pharisees rose up and said, it is necessary to circumcise them and order them to keep the law of Moses. The apostles and elders of that time, who were just in awe because the veil had not been lifted yet, that the Gentiles would even be saved. They had no idea that the gospel, according to the Bible, was first preached to Abraham, that in him all nations would be saved. So after much dispute and talking, they finally got together, and the head of the church, James, gave them a word that they agreed on. After they finished speaking, James replied, brother, listen to me. Simeon, that is the apostle Peter, has related how God first visited the Gentiles to take from them a people for his name and part of his inheritance. And so, as the head of the church, he said, this is my judgment, is that we should not trouble those of the Gentiles who turn to God, but we should write to them out of all the law of the Gentiles. Here's the only advice they say, that if you want to be part of the church, abstain from things polluted by idols, and from sexual immorality, and from what has been strangled, and from blood. He even says it again, because they wanted to send a letter, not the epistle of Galatians, but they wanted to send a letter back to those people. So they sent Judas and, the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses with the following letter back to those people who started the questioning in Antioch, Galatia. The brothers, both the apostles and the elders, to the brothers who are of the Gentiles. So they're brothers in Christ. Greetings. Since we have heard that some persons have gone out from us pretending to be Jews and troubled you with words unsettling your mind, although the true pillars of the church, we gave them no instruction. It has seemed good to us, having come to one accord, to choose men and send them to you with our beloved Barnabas and Paul, men who have risked their lives for the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. We have therefore sent these to the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, who themselves will tell you the same things by word of mouth. For it has seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us to lay on you no greater burden. You don't have to keep the whole law, other than these requirements: that you abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols, and from blood, from food that has been strangled, and from sexual immorality. And why food that's been strangled? Well, we know now through the adrenochrome studies recently released that it introduces things into the bloodstream that evil people like, which is why they line up chickens by the thousands to have them terrified before they die. If you keep yourselves from these, you will do well. So we can see that according to Scripture, in verse 28, what is the word requirement? These were requirements for the Gentiles, and I believe we should take them as requirements now. It is really necessary things. Only one times, but it is essential. So, necessary things. And they didn't want to lay that burden on them. But if you do these things, you will do well. A very poorly translated thing, because if you want to do well, and I do, and I know you do, I know you should, you'd look up and say, you will do well, and you'll find out that this word is also not as rarely used. But if you ever want to hear well done, my good and faithful servant, it's that same word. That's the importance of reading and studying the Bible and realizing there is a conspiracy to silence myself. Mud flood was Armageddon, and the truth that this is a flat earth nation. The golden age is past. You know, I'm never going to tell you anything else. Why would I? I know I've been called to have your best interest at heart. Amen. Hallelujah. Aho.